As a fiery socialist speaker publicly attacks his family, Barron Trump, usually reserved, rises from the crowd, shocking everyone. His powerful words silence the room, but the backlash is relentless. Then, an unexpected letter changes everything. A warning follows. Be careful, Barron. Not everyone wants you to succeed. What happens next will leave you speechless. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The energy in the packed auditorium was palpable, the air thick with anticipation. The crowd buzzed with excitement as Rachel Evans, a well-known socialist speaker, took the stage. The bright overhead lights reflected off her determined expression as she adjusted the microphone, preparing to launch into a speech that would set the internet ablaze. The moment she opened her mouth, her voice cut through the air like a blade, sharp, passionate, and brimming with conviction. For too long, we've watched the elite hoard wealth, build walls instead of bridges, and dictate the future while ordinary people struggle. Rachel's voice rose with every word, sending waves of applause and cheers rippling through the crowd. In the midst of the electrified audience, a young man sat still, unmoving, his face hidden beneath the shadow of a baseball cap. Unlike the others, he did not clap. He did not cheer. He simply listened, his jaw tightening with each accusation hurled at his family. Rachel's speech intensified and the crowd fed off her energy. The Trump family is the epitome of privilege. Born into power, surrounded by money, untouchable. Tell me, what do they know about struggle, about the real pain that working Americans face every single day? Laughter and applause erupted in response, echoing off the walls. Some audience members jeered, others nodded in agreement. But still the young man in the cap remained silent, his hands clenching into fists beneath the table. Barron Trump had heard it all before, the accusations, the mockery, the disdain for the name he carried. But tonight, something inside him burned hotter than usual. He wasn't a child anymore, hidden behind the security of his family's political legacy. He was 18, an adult, and he had spent his entire life watching the world attack his father, his mother, and now himself. He could feel his heart pounding, the heat rising to his face. You should walk away, he told himself. You should let it go, like you always do. But he couldn't. Then it happened. Rachel's final words sliced through the air, her voice dripping with condemnation. People like the Trumps don't know what it's like to feel powerless. The moment those words hit his ears, something inside Barron snapped. Before he could think, before his security team could react, he stood up. A collective gasp swept through the room. The motion sent his cap tumbling to the floor, revealing his face to the stunned audience. A hush fell over the hall as recognition spread like wildfire. Barron Trump. The Barron Trump was here. For the first time in his life, he wasn't hiding. He wasn't retreating. He was about to speak. And the world was about to listen. The silence in the auditorium was deafening. The once roaring crowd now sat frozen, their eyes fixed on the tall young man who had just revealed himself. A moment ago, he was just another nameless figure in the audience, but now he was Barron Trump, and he was standing right in the middle of enemy territory. Rachel Evans, usually quick with a sharp retort, seemed momentarily stunned. She blinked, processing the situation as Barron took a deliberate step forward, his expression unreadable. His towering frame commanded attention, but it wasn't just his height that made the room feel smaller. It was the quiet intensity in his eyes. Then he spoke. "May I say something?" His voice was even, steady, but beneath it was something deeper, something raw. A murmur rippled through the audience. Some whispered among themselves, others craned their necks to get a better view. Barron Trump, the most private member of the Trump family, had just walked onto the stage. And he wanted to speak. Rachel hesitated. For the first time in her career, she found herself at a crossroads. This was supposed to be her stage, her moment. She had spent years building her reputation as a fearless critic of political elites. And now, the son of the very family she condemned was standing before her, asking for the microphone. The tension was thick, suffocating. The cameras were already rolling, capturing every second. If she refused him, she risked looking like a coward, like someone who silenced opposition rather than engaging in debate. If she agreed, she had no idea what he was about to say. With a slow, measured movement, she extended the microphone toward him. "All right, Barron," she said, forcing a smirk to mask her unease. "Let's hear what you have to say." Barron took the microphone, gripping it firmly. He exhaled sharply, gathering his thoughts. Then, he turned to face the audience. "I've spent my entire life being judged for my last name," he began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of years of restraint. "I've been told who I am before I even got a chance to figure it out myself. I've watched my father be called a monster, my mother ridiculed, my family ripped apart in the headlines. And through it all, I stayed silent." The room was impossibly still. Barron looked directly at Rachel. "But tonight, you gave me my name. You accused my family of being privileged, greedy, out of touch. You painted us as villains in front of this audience, and I have to ask, have you ever spoken to me before this moment?" Rachel's smirk faltered. "No," Barron continued. "Then how do you know who I am? How do you know who my family really is? Because of headlines? Because of what someone else told you?" A flicker of uncertainty passed through the audience. The same crowd that had cheered so loudly moments ago now found themselves listening. "You say we build walls instead of bridges," Barron pressed on, his voice stronger now. "You say we don't care about people like you. But did you know that my father has personally helped families who lost everything, without cameras, without reporters? Did you know that my mother has worked on projects for children's health and well-being long before she ever set foot in the White House? Or is it just easier to believe what fits the story you already decided was true?" Rachel shifted uncomfortably. "You don't have to like us," Barron admitted, scanning the audience. "You don't even have to agree with us. But please, don't dehumanize us. We're people, just like you. We feel pain, we make mistakes, and we try, just like you." His voice softened as he looked out at the sea of faces before him. "I don't want to stand up here and fight," he said, quieter now. "I just want to be heard. Just once, I want people to see me as more than a name." The silence that followed was profound. The audience, once wild with energy, was now lost in thought. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others stared at Barron with newfound curiosity. Rachel Evans, for all her fire and confidence, seemed at a loss for words. Barron slowly extended the microphone back to her, meeting her gaze with an expression that was neither angry nor defensive, just human. For the first time in her career, Rachel had been challenged in a way she hadn't expected. Not by aggression, not by arrogance, but by something far more powerful: authenticity. For a moment, Rachel Evans stood frozen. The microphone was still warm from Barron's grip, his final words lingering in the charged air like an unshakable echo. The audience, which had previously erupted in cheers at her speech, now sat in silence, processing what had just transpired. Rachel was known for her quick comebacks, for her sharp wit, for always having the last word. But tonight she had nothing. Not because she agreed with Barron, but because she had never expected to be confronted in this way, not by a Trump, and certainly not like this. He hadn't attacked her, he hadn't shouted. He had simply spoken from the heart. And that, more than anything, had left her momentarily defenseless. The silence stretched, tension thick in the air. Then, a single clap rang out from the back of the room. Then another, and another. Soon, a ripple of applause spread across the crowd. Not overwhelming, but measured, thoughtful. Rachel took a steadying breath, scanning the room. Some audience members remained rigid, arms crossed in defiance. Others had softened, their brows furrowed in contemplation. And then there were those who seemed outright moved, their expressions reflecting an internal battle they had not expected to have tonight. She turned back to Barron, her voice carrying an edge of restraint. "I won't pretend I agree with you," she said carefully, forcing herself to regain control of the stage. "But I will say this." She hesitated, the words forming before she even realized she was speaking them. "That took guts." Barron met her gaze, his expression unreadable. Rachel straightened her posture, gripping the microphone tightly as if drawing strength from it. "But courage doesn't mean correctness," she added, her confidence returning, though lacking its usual bite. "You say your family helps people quietly, that they do things behind the scenes, away from the cameras. But that's just it, isn't it? There are no cameras, no proof, just words. And in politics, words aren't enough." A murmur rippled through the audience, some nodding in agreement. Barron exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. "I understand your skepticism," he said, his voice remaining steady. "But does that mean I shouldn't have a voice? Does my last name erase my right to be heard?" Rachel opened her mouth, then closed it. Barron continued, his expression softening. "If I told you everything you've said about me and my family tonight was unfair, would you believe me?" Rachel narrowed her eyes. "No." "Exactly," Barron nodded. "You've made up your mind. Before I ever spoke, before I ever had a chance to introduce myself, you decided who I was. That's fine, that's your right. But that's the world I've had to grow up in. Where people don't see me, they see a name. And it doesn't matter what I do, what I say, how I try to prove myself, that name follows me like a shadow." Rachel exhaled sharply, feeling the control of the conversation slipping. "So what do you want, Barron?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "For people to just stop criticizing you? That's not how this works." Barron shook his head. "No, Rachel. I don't want silence. I want fairness. I want people to stop pretending I don't exist until it's convenient to use me as a headline." The words struck something deep within Rachel, something she had not anticipated. She had built her career on attacking systems, not people. But tonight, she had looked Barron Trump in the eye and seen something she had never considered before: the human cost of the fight. The debate could have gone on, could have continued until neither side had anything left to say. But something about the moment told Rachel that no matter what she responded with, the room had already shifted. Barron had been heard. With a final glance at him, Rachel turned to the audience. "We'll continue this discussion another time," she said, her voice neutral, her eyes giving nothing away. "For now, let's move forward." Barron knew what that meant. It was Rachel's way of gracefully ending an argument she wasn't sure she could win. He didn't press further. Instead, he gave her a small nod before turning to leave the stage. The moment he stepped down, the world seemed to explode. Within hours, the video of Barron's unexpected confrontation went viral. Every news outlet, every social media platform, every political commentator had something to say. The headlines varied wildly, each outlet spinning the story to fit their own narrative. Barron Trump's stunned socialist speaker shuts her down in fiery speech. Rachel Evans silences Barron Trump after failed attempt to defend his family. Trump legacy continues, but is Barron really different? Clips of the moment spread like wildfire. Some painted Barron as a hero standing up against unfair attacks. Others framed him as a privileged boy, desperately trying to control the narrative. And the comments were even worse. "Rich kid finally speaks. What, did daddy write his speech for him? I may not like the Trumps, but that took guts. Respect. Funny how he's suddenly speaking now. Where was this courage when his father was in office?" Amid Rachel Evans look weak. Love it. Barron read them all, his stomach twisting with every refresh. He had never wanted this. He had only wanted to be heard. As the media frenzy intensified, his family remained silent. For now. He knew his father had seen the video, knew that there were likely discussions happening behind closed doors. But as the hours passed with no word from Donald Trump, Barron began to wonder what his father really thought of his actions. Then the threats started. At first, they were just the usual insults, the typical online hate he had grown used to seeing. But then the messages became more personal, more direct. "Be careful what you start, Barron. You think you can just step into this world and walk away? Think again. Not everyone wants to hear you speak, kid. Some of us prefer silence." The last one made his blood run cold. He showed the messages to his security team, who immediately escalated protection measures. Guards were stationed at every entrance of his family's estate. Public appearances were limited. His phone was monitored. Melania was the first to voice concern. "You don't have to do this, Barron," she told him late that night, worry evident in her eyes. "The world is cruel, and once you step into it, you can't go back." But Barron had already made up his mind. "If I stay silent, they win." His voice was steady, but inside he felt the weight of what was happening. He had ignited something far bigger than himself. And he wasn't sure if he could control the fire. The morning after Barron Trump's speech, the world felt different. The sun still rose over the estate, the morning birds still chirped outside his window, and yet everything had changed. The weight of millions of opinions now pressed down on him, each one dissecting his words, twisting them into narratives he had no control over. He sat on the edge of his bed, scrolling through his phone. Every major news outlet had run with his confrontation with Rachel Evans, each spinning it in their own way. Some hailed him as the unexpected voice of reason, while others called him a privileged kid trying to play the underdog. But the comments, the endless stream of reactions from everyday people, those were the ones that cut the deepest. "He's just another rich boy who thinks he can change the world with a speech. Never thought I'd say this, but he made some good points. Respect. Rachel was too soft on him, should have shut him down harder. Does he really think we feel sorry for him?" Barron exhaled, rubbing his temples. He had expected backlash, had braced for it, but this was something else. This was war. A knock at the door broke his trance. His mother, Melania, stepped in, her usual calm presence slightly strained. She didn't say anything at first, just sat beside him, watching as he scrolled. "You shouldn't read those," she said finally. "I know," Barron admitted. But he didn't stop. She placed a gentle hand on his, lowering the phone. "You spoke from your heart. That is what matters." Barron met her gaze, searching for reassurance. "Did I make a mistake?" Melania shook her head. "No. But you have stepped into a world where every word you say will be twisted. You have to be ready for that." Barron nodded, but deep down he wasn't sure if he was ready at all. Meanwhile, in the outside world, the political firestorm raged on. News channels ran debates, featuring analysts arguing over whether Barron had been brave or simply naive. Late-night comedians turned his speech into jokes. Social media continued its relentless cycle of support, outrage, and mockery. But then, something more disturbing started happening. Threats. At first, they were vague, angry messages from faceless accounts. "You should have stayed quiet. You don't belong in this conversation. You'll regret this." But then the messages became more personal. One afternoon, Barron's security team intercepted a letter left outside the Trump estate. Unlike the usual hate mail, this one was written by hand, in shaky, uneven letters. "You think speaking makes you brave? You have no idea what's coming." The moment his security lead, a no-nonsense former Secret Service agent named Cole, read it, the atmosphere in the estate changed. "We're escalating your protection detail," Cole informed Barron, his expression unreadable. "For now, limit public appearances. No unnecessary outings. If you need to go anywhere, we clear it first." Barron frowned. "I don't want to hide." "This isn't about hiding, it's about being smart," Cole countered. "You don't get to make mistakes in this position. Your last name means people either want to protect you or destroy you. There is no in-between." Barron wanted to argue, but the truth was, he felt it too. The world had shifted, and for the first time, he realized just how dangerous words could be. Despite the warnings, invitations poured in. Television networks wanted exclusive interviews. Journalists begged for his perspective. Even major universities invited him to speak at events. But the most surprising invitation came from Rachel Evans herself. Her email was short, direct. "Barron, I don't agree with you, but I'd rather have this conversation in person than let the media twist it for us. If you're willing, let's meet. Just us. No cameras, no crowd." Barron read it twice, then a third time. He hadn't expected this. A part of him wanted to decline, to stay in the safety of his home and let the storm pass. But another part of him, the part that had driven him to stand up that night, told him this was important. He responded with a simple, "Tell me when and where." The meeting was arranged at a small private cafe in Washington, far from the media's eyes. Rachel arrived first. Gone was the fiery stage presence. In its place was a woman who, for the first time, looked uncertain. Barron took a seat across from her, the tension thick between them. "I'll be honest," Rachel said, folding her arms. "I didn't think you'd come." "Neither did I," Barron admitted, offering a small smirk. She exhaled, studying him carefully. "I don't regret what I said that night, but I do regret one thing." Barron raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Rachel hesitated. "I forgot you were a person." Her honesty caught him off guard. "I've spent years attacking systems, families like yours," she continued. "And maybe I've gotten too used to seeing people as symbols rather than humans." Barron leaned forward. "That's exactly what I was trying to say on stage." Rachel looked away, nodding slowly. For the first time, she understood. The two of them spoke for hours, exchanging their perspectives not in attack, but in understanding. By the end, Rachel extended her hand. "We'll probably never agree on a lot of things," she said. "But I respect you more than I did before." Barron shook it, a sense of closure settling over him. "Same here." But as he left the cafe, his phone buzzed with a chilling message. "Be careful, Barron. Not everyone wants you to succeed." His breath hitched. The fight was far from over. At a packed youth conference dedicated to discussing identity and judgment, the atmosphere was electric, full of hope, passion, and the raw energy of young voices determined to be heard. Barron Trump, still reeling from his earlier confrontation, had been invited to speak about his personal struggles growing up under a scrutinizing spotlight. His speech had already stirred debate, drawing cheers from those who resonated with his message and jeers from those who remained unconvinced by his claims of vulnerability. As he stood on the stage, every word he uttered cut through the din, challenging long-held stereotypes and demanding that people see beyond his family name. His measured tone and steady gaze captured the attention of the entire audience, and for a moment it felt as if the world were holding its breath. Midway through his heartfelt address, when Barron was emphasizing that his voice was not just his own, but a voice for every person who had been unfairly judged, a disturbance emerged from the crowd. A man in a dark hooded sweatshirt began to inch forward, his presence almost ghost-like amidst the sea of faces. The subtle shuffle of his steps was initially overlooked by many, until his movement grew more pronounced. Barron, who had been deeply focused on sharing his truth, suddenly caught sight of this suspicious figure. In that split second, his eyes narrowed. He recognized something in the man's furtive movements that sent a chill down his spine. Without hesitation, Barron's security detail sprang into action. Guards pushed forward, their voices commanding and urgent as they converged on the hooded man. The crowd erupted into chaos. Screams and shouts filled the air as people scrambled to see what was happening. Within moments, the man was tackled to the ground by a group of security agents. His hood pulled back to reveal a face etched with both fear and determination. The sudden commotion silenced even the most fervent supporters on the stage. In the midst of the turmoil, one of the agents discovered a crumpled piece of paper clutched in the man's trembling hand. As the guards secured him, Barron's eyes locked onto the discarded note. With a heavy heart pounding in his chest, he reached down and carefully unfolded the paper. The faded handwriting on it sent shockwaves through his entire being. "You saved my son. Your words gave him hope." A hush fell over the auditorium. For a few agonizing seconds, time seemed to slow down. The note, simple, raw, and undeniably powerful, spoke volumes. It was as if the fragile words on that paper encapsulated the pain and the possibility of redemption that many had experienced but never expressed. The hooded man, now subdued on the floor, looked up with tears glistening in his eyes and, with a voice barely above a whisper, he muttered, "I just wanted to say thank you." The entire room was gripped by stunned silence. No one had anticipated that amidst the charged debate and political rhetoric, a moment of such pure, unfiltered gratitude would unfold. Some audience members began to murmur softly, while others were visibly moved, their expressions softening with empathy. Social media feeds exploded with live reactions. Hashtags were quickly emerging, with people across the nation praising Barron for giving the man a platform to express his deep personal pain and gratitude. Barron's heart was pounding so hard that it felt as though it might burst through his chest. In that single moment, all the anger, criticism, and political posturing seemed to melt away, replaced by a raw human connection that transcended any ideological divide. Here was a father, so desperate to be heard that he risked everything to share a personal tragedy, a silent thank you that carried the weight of loss and healing. Moved by the sincerity of the moment, Barron did something that stunned everyone present. He extended his hand to the man on the ground. Ignoring the admonitions of his security team and the lingering tension in the room, he knelt down and gently helped the hooded man to his feet. As he did so, his eyes shone with a mix of compassion, determination, and a quiet defiance against the forces that sought to dehumanize those who struggled in silence. "I'm glad your son is okay," Barron said softly, his voice steady despite the flood of emotions surging within him. The man's tearful expression shifted to one of tentative relief, and he whispered another "thank you," as if the simple act of being helped up was a lifeline in a sea of relentless judgment. That act of kindness, so unexpected in a charged atmosphere, reverberated through the venue. Cameras captured every moment, and the video quickly went viral, sparking a national conversation. Headlines screamed, "Barron Trump extends a hand of compassion amid political firestorm," while pundits debated whether this was a genuine moment of vulnerability or merely another calculated move by a privileged figure trying to rewrite his narrative. Within hours, supportive messages poured in from across the country. Young people who had once felt marginalized began to share their own stories of being judged and misunderstood. Hashtags like Barron Speaks and Humanity Matters flooded social media, and countless voices echoed the sentiment that sometimes the smallest gesture can change everything. Yet, amid the praise, Barron also faced harsh criticism. Some detractors labeled him as a spoiled rich kid, using his status to gain attention, while others accused him of being insincere. But in that moment, standing there with the hooded man, Barron knew that the genuine gratitude in those few, simple words transcended all political agendas. The encounter left him with a profound realization. His voice, despite being tied to a notorious family name, had the power to heal, to unite, and to transform lives. As the day wore on, he retreated backstage, his mind a whirlwind of emotions and thoughts. The incident was both a vindication of his courage and a heavy reminder of the responsibility that came with speaking out. In that volatile arena, where words could either divide or bring people together, Barron Trump had chosen to listen, to act, and to give hope. And in doing so, he ignited a firestorm that would continue to influence the national conversation on identity, judgment, and the power of genuine human connection. The atmosphere in Barron Trump's private quarters was heavy with tension. The echoes of the youth conference still rang in his mind, his own words replaying over and over. The interaction with the man who had risked everything just to say thank you had left an indelible mark on him. He had extended his hand, helped the man up, and in doing so had unintentionally ignited a conversation larger than himself. He had never imagined that one speech, one moment of vulnerability, could cause such a shift in the public discourse. But as he scrolled through social media that night, he saw two sides of the storm he had stirred. On one end, messages of hope poured in. Young people from across the country were posting their own stories of being judged unfairly, some because of their last names, some because of their backgrounds, others because of the circumstances they were born into. Hashtags like Barron Speaks and Humanity Matters trended for days, a testament to the ripple effect of his words. Yet, on the other end, there was the backlash. He had expected it, but the sheer intensity of it still shook him. Political commentators on major networks dissected every word he had spoken, some dismissing his speech as nothing more than a calculated attempt to soften his family's image. "He's just another privileged kid pretending to understand real struggles," one pundit sneered on a late-night show. "Let's be real, Barron Trump doesn't know a day of hardship in his life." The harshest attacks came in the form of anonymous online threats. At first, they were just vague insults, the kind of negativity that came with the territory of being a public figure. But then the messages turned darker. One particularly chilling one stood out. "You can't save everyone. Stop pretending. The more you speak, the more enemies you make." Barron's fingers hovered over the screen as he reread the words. It was different from the usual criticisms. There was a weight to it, a warning laced with something sinister. He showed it to his head of security, who immediately went into action. Protocols were reinforced, security was tightened, and for the first time since he had spoken out, Barron felt something he hadn't expected. Fear. That fear didn't come from the idea of someone physically harming him, though he knew that was a possibility. It came from something deeper. What if they're right? What if I am making things worse? What if speaking up only brings more chaos? The doubt gnawed at him, heavier than any insult or threat could be. His mother, Melania, noticed the shift in his demeanor. She found him on the balcony late that night, staring out over the estate, his hands gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. "You're feeling it, aren't you?" she asked softly. Barron exhaled, his breath shaky. "I don't know if I'm helping or making things worse." Melania placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're helping more than you realize. But you don't have to carry this alone." Barron nodded, but the uncertainty remained. He wasn't just facing political attacks. He was facing something much bigger. The weight of responsibility that came with using his voice. And now, with this anonymous warning hanging over him, he was beginning to wonder if he was truly ready for the road ahead. The following morning, as he was still grappling with his doubts, an envelope was delivered to his room. Unlike the online messages, this one had been written by hand. His security team had already screened it, ensuring it wasn't a threat. With cautious curiosity, Barron tore it open. The handwriting was uneven, shaky, as if written by someone who had struggled to steady their hands. The letter began simply. "My son ended his life last year because he felt unseen. Tonight I saw in you the voice he never had. Thank you for being brave enough to speak when he couldn't." Barron felt his breath hitch. His grip on the paper tightened as he reread the words, trying to process the weight they carried. His heart pounded, not out of fear this time, but out of something deeper, an understanding that was beginning to settle into his bones. This was why he had spoken out. This was why he couldn't stop. Tears blurred his vision as he clutched the letter. He had always known that words had power, but now he truly felt the gravity of them. He wasn't just fighting for his family's reputation. He wasn't just responding to critics. He was speaking for people who had no voice, for those who had been silenced by the weight of their struggles. Later that day, he shared the letter with his mother. As she read it, her usual poised demeanor cracked, and she covered her mouth, visibly shaken. "This is why I can't stop," Barron said, his voice firm despite the emotion constricting his throat. Melania pulled him into a rare embrace, holding him as if trying to shield him from the weight of everything he was carrying. "You've found your purpose, Barron. Keep going." And so, with renewed determination, Barron made a decision that would set the course for his next steps. Inspired by the letter and the countless messages from young people who had reached out, he began planning something bigger than a speech, bigger than a viral moment. He wanted to create something lasting. That evening, he drafted a proposal for what would soon become his biggest initiative yet, the Human Connection Project, an organization dedicated to mental health awareness and anti-bullying programs. It wasn't just about politics or public perception anymore. It was about real people, real pain, real change. As he sat in his room, writing out the core mission of the initiative, he thought back to the moment he stood on that stage, facing Rachel Evans, standing in the fire of judgment and criticism. He thought about the man with the note at the youth conference, about the girl who had asked him how to stay strong. For the first time since he had spoken out, Barron felt something stronger than fear, purpose, and he wasn't going to let it go. The launch of the Human Connection Project sent shockwaves through the media. Some praised Barron Trump for using his platform to advocate for mental health awareness, while others dismissed it as nothing more than a publicity stunt. The scrutiny was relentless. News anchors debated his motives, late-night comedians ridiculed his speeches, and political analysts questioned whether this was his way of crafting a personal brand separate from his family. But Barron didn't care. He wasn't doing this for validation, and he certainly wasn't doing it for the approval of pundits who thrived on controversy. He was doing it for the people who had written to him, the kids who had felt invisible, the parents who had lost their children to despair, the ones who needed a voice when they had none. The project's first event was scheduled to take place in New York, a gathering focused on breaking the stigma surrounding mental health struggles in young people. The response was overwhelming. Thousands registered to attend, eager to hear Barron speak in person. But as the event drew closer, the resistance intensified. Protesters began organizing online. Threats flooded his inbox. Anonymous messages warned him to step away, to stay silent. One in particular stood out. "You're playing with fire. Walk away before you get burned." His security team took it seriously. His mother, Melania, was visibly shaken when she read it. "Barron, maybe it's time to step back," she pleaded. "You've done more than enough." But Barron shook his head. "If I stop now, they win. I won't let fear silence me." The night before the event, he barely slept. He sat by his window, staring at the city skyline, replaying every moment that had led him here. He thought about the letter from the grieving mother, about the boy who had been bullied for his last name, about the man who had risked everything just to say, "Thank you." This wasn't about him anymore. It never had been. When the morning came, security was on high alert. The venue was surrounded by barricades. Police officers monitored the entrances. Protesters lined the streets, holding signs that read "Fraud" and "Privileged Prince." But as Barron stepped onto the stage, he wasn't thinking about them. He was thinking about the people inside the auditorium, the ones who had come looking for hope. "I know what it feels like to be judged before you've even spoken," he began, his voice steady but firm. "I know what it's like to feel unheard, to feel like your story doesn't matter. But I'm here to tell you it does. You do." The crowd erupted into applause. But just as Barron took a breath to continue, a commotion broke out near the entrance. A man was pushing his way through security, his face hidden beneath a hood. Barron's heart pounded. Guards moved in, ready to act. But the man didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he pulled something from his pocket, a crumpled letter. "Please," he choked out, "let me speak." The entire auditorium tensed as security surrounded the hooded man. The crowd, which had just moments ago been clapping for Barron's words, now buzzed with uncertainty. The air was thick with anticipation, the energy shifting from inspiration to fear. Barron's security team urged him to step back, their voices firm but professional. "Sir, we need to remove him immediately." Barron hesitated, his gaze locked onto the man's trembling hands as he clutched a crumpled letter. There was no aggression in his stance, only desperation. Something about the moment, about the look in the man's eyes, made Barron's heart clench. "Wait," Barron finally said, raising a hand to signal the guards to stand down. The tension in the room thickened. His security detail exchanged wary glances but obeyed his command, keeping a close watch. Barron took a step forward, the crowd holding its breath as he addressed the man directly. "What do you want to say?" His voice was calm but firm. The man swallowed hard, his eyes darting around nervously. He glanced down at the letter, gripping it so tightly his knuckles turned white. I just needed to thank you," he stammered. His voice was raw, unsteady. "You don't know me, but your speech saved my son's life." A hush fell over the audience. Even the protesters outside seemed to have quieted. "My son was going to take his own life last week," the man continued, his voice breaking. "He thought no one saw him, that no one cared. But then he saw your speech. He watched it over and over. He told me that for the first time in years, he felt like someone understood him. He decided to stay. He's alive because of you." The weight of the man's words crashed over Barron like a tidal wave. His throat tightened, his breath catching in his chest. This was why he had taken the stage, why he had refused to back down, despite the criticism, the threats, the ridicule. He wasn't just speaking into a void. People were listening. People were feeling. The man took a shaky breath and held out the letter. "He wanted to write this to you himself," he said, "but he's still finding his strength. He asked me to give it to you." Barron reached out, his hand steady but his heart pounding. He took the letter carefully, as if it were something sacred. For a moment he just stared at it, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of what it represented. "Tell your son," Barron's voice wavered slightly, but he steadied himself. "Tell him I see him, and that I'm proud of him." The man let out a shaky sob, nodding rapidly. Then something unexpected happened. The crowd, both supporters and skeptics, rose to their feet. Applause thundered through the auditorium, not for Barron, not for politics, but for a moment of raw, undeniable humanity. Even the protesters outside, some of whom had once shouted against him, had gone silent. Barron turned to face the audience once more, his emotions raw but his resolve stronger than ever. "This is why we speak," he said, his voice carrying through the room. "Because words have power, because no one should ever feel invisible, and because sometimes the right words at the right time can save a life." Tears shimmered in the eyes of many, including Barron himself. As the event concluded, he stepped off the stage and into the crowd, shaking hands, listening to stories, embracing the people who had come to hear him. No longer just a name, no longer just a headline. He had become something more. A voice for the unheard, a symbol of resilience, a force for change. Barron Trump's journey from silent observer to courageous speaker is a testament to the power of using one's voice for good. In a world divided by labels and assumptions, his story reminds us that real change begins when we choose to listen, understand, and stand up for those who feel unseen. His words sparked conversations, bridged differences, and even saved lives. Proof that one voice can ignite a movement. This story isn't just about Barron, it's about all of us. It's about the courage to speak, even when the world tries to silence us. If this inspiring journey moved you, don't let it stop here. Like this video, subscribe to the channel and share it with others who need a reminder that their voice matters. What part of Barron's journey resonated most with you? Let us know in the comments below. Together we can amplify the power of truth, resilience, and hope.